1995. So one of the most influential things about this generation, of course, is that they are digital natives. And you'll hear that term often. They're digital natives. They have never lived in a world without having access to the world. In the world today, there are about 2.5 billion with a B Gen Z individuals. And if you look around the world, we see there are nations, particularly in Africa and other places, where the majority of the population is lower than 15. And so, although we have had a lower birth rate here in the United States, Gen Z today is the largest. It is the largest generation already in our nation. And so Gen Z right now comprises about 26% of our population. You know, when we look at Montana and when we look at Great Falls, we know that in some ways, small towns like here, like Glen Rock, Wyoming, where my daddy was born, like Copper River, Alaska, where I own land, and some of these very rural places in some ways are outliers related to population, and yet your students here, your young people here are living in a global world, I wanted to spend some time just sharing a few things. You know some of these things, but I think they're interesting when we sit down and look at them as a whole, but then talk about what are some of the applications. How does this impact you in the business world here? How does it impact you educationally? And then also, how does it impact us going forward? And you know, I was up at 3 o'clock. David knows this about me. I'll prepare a presentation and it's like, no, I'll get to a place and I've been doing my recon here in town and I'll make some adjustments. So I'm not using a PowerPoint because PowerPoints just aren't flexible at all. And this generation, if anything, we have to be flexible. So I don't know, you guys control your mics, I guess, but please feel free to speak up and interject because we're really here to have a conversation because we're all committed to really supporting this generation and we want them to be successful. The researchers tell us, the demographers tell us, that this will be the last generation in the United States that will be predominantly white. 56% of this generation are white, 26% Latina, African American are 14%. That number has stayed quite constant in the country for a while, and Asians comprise 4%. And there would be people who would identify with different ethnicities, but those are the larger ethnicities. But we are seeing a huge demographic shift. And one of the things that we know about demographics is that it's some of the cleanest data you have, meaning once a generation is born, you will have different life expectancies, but that generation is in place. This generation, because it is so tied into technology, is really the first generation since man was here. This is the very first generation that does not need the previous generation for information. And that's a humbling thing to us as educators, because we like to think as educators, you know, we're the ones here and we're going to prepare you and everything. And yet the very truth is this generation has access to more information than we could ever give them in a lifetime. There's a challenge with that, because just because you have access to something doesn't mean it's necessarily accurate. And it's almost like the young people today and the kids today, they've access to so much. They're trying to take a sip of water out of a fire hydrant. And so there's some of those challenges. The teenagers today, 95% of teens in the country say that they have access to smartphones. And that's why this whole conversation of smartphones are their computers, their bank, really their clock, it's their everything. So when we see, well, why are you on your phone all the time? Why are you on your phone all the time? Their world is in their phone. I mean, their whole world is in their phone often. And so being a digital native means that they have access to anybody, any place, anytime. Anybody, any place, anytime, except maybe North Korea. And so that's a real difference. And I think for towns and communities like Great Falls, that's a challenge, because with that kind of access, it means that the core values in the community that small cities and small towns work hard to keep and pass down to generations are being influenced by so many outside places. Some of that is very good. I'm not saying that we want to be isolationists. Obviously, we don't. We do not want to be isolationists. But we also know that outside influences can very quickly change people's perception. And listen, they're on their phones more. They're not watching regular TV. They're not going to main news stations, right, David, for information. They're getting information from so many different places. And again, some of that can be positive and some of that is a downside. If you're around them, and I actually, my 6 grandchildren are in this category. My eldest grandchild lived with me. He's in 8th grade. He lived with me in the fall semester so that he could attend school in person. I will never forgive my son-in-law for taking my daughter and 3 grandchildren back to California, but they're working on getting out. But please get out. But seriously, on the serious side, when you have children and teenagers who aren't even allowed to go to the corner playground and shoot basketball, something is very wrong. In 8th grade, so I took Tyson in for 8th grade. But around Thanksgiving, my son-in-law and daughter decided that Elizabeth would go with the 2 other children who were in 3rd grade and 5th grade, and Tyson would join them outside Atlanta, where my son teaches. And they're in a private faith-based school, all 6 of my grandchildren, but they are in school all day long. And the biggest concern was the depression, the anxiety, the fear. And so when we talk about what the researchers are telling us and what we're experiencing, we have to recognize that the influence of the pandemic, we're just beginning to see what it will mean. The blessing in smaller places like you have here is that you have been able to get your children out more. You have been able to allow them, and the whole mental health piece we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But I saw with my grandson, and being 14 and having him, and he would wake up in the morning and the first thing is on his phone. He's constantly checking everything. He's listening to what's happening with the riots in Oregon, and he's telling me, "Grandmommy, you just don't understand these issues. You don't understand what's going on in the world." And he would get in the car after football practice and immediately, but he's scrolling through his Instagram and Snapchat and just being bombarded with these little snippets of information. And so and no wonder teenagers have the attention span of a goldfish. And we laugh about that, which is about 1.5 seconds, by the way. But they say that this generation, their attention span has been so limited. They tend to be much more activist and be very committed to social justice, issues of equality, and they're very aware of that. They're much more inclined to be socialist in their thinking. Let me say that again. They're much more inclined to be socialist in their thinking. The young people that have just started college, many of them believe that Bernie Sanders had the nomination stolen from him twice from the Democratic Party. They're very concerned about equality. However, it's an equality that I would say we haven't done as good of a job articulating. For example, I'm one who believes, and I've seen enough of the world, that redistribution of wealth is a misnomer. It's really the redistribution of poverty. And yet this whole idea that everything has to be exactly fair. But when you push young people and you say, okay, so everything should be fair, meaning if it's not equal, exactly equal, it hasn't been fair. But then go and ask teenagers who are taking AP Calc and say, okay, well, you have the highest grade in the class, so let's pull 15 points of your grade, and we're going to redistribute this amongst some of your classmates because you want everything to be fair. And then they immediately back up. They say, oh, no, 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 no. Now, I don't think that's exactly what I mean. But they do have a heart and they want to make a difference. And here's the thing about their social activism that's fascinating. They can have flash mobs immediately. They can have flash mobs immediately. I mean, if they wanted to picket here, which, help us, Lord, they're not. But if they wanted to get people to picket here, I promise you, in less than 10 minutes, you could have a whole group of kids screaming and yelling here about some slight. It may have really occurred, or it may have been a perceived slight. So the activism is something that can occur very, very quickly. It certainly is a challenge for law enforcement, and as you work as a community, and I know you already do this, but the importance of building trust and building relationships with these young people so that they become involved in law enforcement, or that they at least have a level of trust. Anything that you're doing related to that is very, very, it's going to be very, very important. As being progressive, they tend to be less cautious than the previous generation. So here's the interesting thing. You know, their parents are the millennials, and the millennials were born into wealth. I mean, they had the millennial children when they were children. The economy was very good. And then the bottom fell out. And that's when we saw the housing crisis. We saw millions of people lose their homes to foreclosures, which means millions and millions of millennials, when they were children, saw their parents go through incredible economic upheaval. Along come their children, Gen Z, who are born into an economy where their parents learn to struggle. And millennials, well, you know this, but millennials are the first generation in our nation that will not supersede their parents as far as things like life expectancy, wealth, job opportunities, land ownership, housing ownership. Gen Z will be much less likely to own a house. They'll also be much less likely to own a car. Car dealerships are in trouble, to be honest with you. If you look 20 years out, this is a generation, they're delaying getting their driver's license. You know what they say? They would rather have their smartphone than a car. They'd rather have their phone than a car. And a car used to be, the car was what you had to go meet up with your friends, and you could get away from your parents, and you could even sometimes sneak out, you know, but you had that independence when you had a car. Well, now the independence is the phone, and they don't want to give up their phone. In fact, if you want to see tirades, if you ever watch every once in a while Dr. Phil and they have a teenager on, you know, usually the screaming, whatever craziness, it's related to somebody taking their phone away. But now we're seeing it with little kids. Mm-hmm. We're seeing it with little children. In fact, the American Pediatric Association has offered guidelines now, because smartphones have become the new binky. You put your baby to bed, not after rocking them and reading them a real story, but you put your baby to bed with a smartphone, and that's how they're falling asleep. If you want to hear a piercing scream, try to take a phone away from a 2-year-old. Piercing scream related to addiction. And when they put the electrodes, like whether it's teenagers or elementary kids that have gotten so hooked on the technology, when the neurologist put those electrodes on the brain, I mean, it's almost like a seizure. The anger centers of the brain are just screaming, but so are the addiction centers of the brain. It's just so powerful. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but it is true economically, and the decisions that you are making as business leaders here, the business, and right now they say about $150 billion annually is controlled by Gen Z individuals. That number will increase as this group has just been moving into the university level ages, and just moving into the age when we would expect them to consider purchasing a home or even renting an apartment. But many of them are staying at home much longer. And that was even pre-pandemic. And now, you have millions of college kids who had to go home. We have millions and millions of high school kids who really, in many ways, aren't going to consider going away to university quite yet. So those implications are profound. One of the things that's interesting economically is, well, who wants to guess what their favorite stores are? Would somebody speak up? What stores do these kids love?
Amazon.
Pardon?
Amazon.
Well, yes, exactly, Amazon. And so sometimes they'll go into a brick and mortar store and they'll see it, but then they'll go back and they'll go, and that's Chelsea.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, Chelsea, I don't have a fabulous picture of you, but I know you look fabulous today. So, yeah, they'll go in and they'll find a better deal. If they're actually purchasing in brick and mortar stores, they love Goodwill. They love thrift shops. They're much more concerned about getting a good deal. Their parents wanted all the name brands, right? Because their parents grew up with more money. And so the parents were name branders and brand loyalty. I'm not going to buy it unless it's exactly this. But this generation, now they'll go into Goodwill and they'll scour and they'll look for name brands, but they don't want to part with their money as quickly. They just don't want to part with their money as quickly. Well, that has implications for you if you look at retail, right? Right, Shane? I mean, if you look at retail, who's going to be coming in? Shane, could you share any observations that you have being in retail?
Yeah, when they come in, and it's been a number of years since I've been in retail in the malls, but really they don't come in a whole lot unless they're coming in with a few friends, but they got their phones in their hands. And they will be checking all this, but then they'll be checking Amazon and other sources to see what they could possibly get it for. And what's interesting when you have conversations with them as well too, and maybe it's not in a store, but you say, hey, here's a book I just read that I think you would enjoy. I mean, they'll pull it up on their Amazon, immediately, and they'll order it and they'll say, well, I'll see it tomorrow or I'll see it next day. And they know it saves them time from getting in their car, driving to a bookstore, walking in, trying to find the book among the tens of thousands of books, and the time to go find it, purchase it, and then leave the store. And what that time takes, they can do it in less than 2 minutes and have it on its way. And that's what we're seeing.
Exactly. They're savvy shoppers, aren't they? They really are savvy shoppers. And there are some things that people don't like about the generation. But every generation, the older generation, criticizes them for things. And I think that's one very important element that we have to realize is if we want to be involved in shaping their thinking and having a part in their world, we can't go in and be hyper judgmental, right? We can't be hyper judgmental. We have to be willing to work alongside and also listen to them and hear from them. What do they want and what are the most important things in their lives? They're much less likely to waste things. They'll repurpose furniture. But then they have their apps online. So they're trading, they're horse trading with their friends. They know what the little apps are in their neighborhood. They'll post something if they need some cash. They'll post something out of their closet. And oftentimes they'll sell it very, very quickly. And it's almost like a bartering system, which personally, I think we all need to up our bartering game. We don't know what's coming down the road. We need to be able to barter products. I think we need to barter services also. And of course, that's part of a cashless society. I'm not advocating that completely, but it just is very interesting to see how they navigate. They tend to be quite generous also. When they see a friend in need that needs something, you'll see them quickly raising money together. They'll order something for someone else. They'll buy food for each other. I've seen that with young people when they find out that there's a need. There is a tenderness. And I think part of that is because they've seen people that don't have as much, and they themselves have not had as much. So they're very, very sensitive. They're very, very sensitive to that. I came in a day early. This time of year, I will not fly in a place and try to get in the night before. But I also wanted to spend a little time and do some recon. And so I was here and I wanted to get some good apples. I just have this thing for good apples. And Washington State, if you haven't tried them yet, Cosmic Crisp. Cosmic Crisp. Am I right? You got it, right, Ty? They're amazing. And they developed those, I think they have spent over a decade developing that. They actually own it. And so I went in and got some Cosmic Crisp, and Honey Crisp is one of the parents. I don't know the other. But checking out was a young man. I knew he was young. I couldn't tell if he was still in high school or just out of high school. So I just engaged, you ask a few questions. Hey, it's beautiful, even though it's snowing, it's beautiful. And did you grow up here? Yeah. And I asked him, I said, so are you going to stay here? And he shook his head, no. I said, are you in college? But then this is what he said, which ties into the research. He said, no, actually, he said, I'm working and saving money to go to school. Dave Ramsey would be proud of him. I'm saving money to go to school. I don't want to go into the kind of debt. And then he was telling me about his investments. 19-year-old kid, he's bagging groceries, he's working, he's taking that money, he's already investing it, he's saving it, and then he's going to go to trade school. And I thought, that's this generation. They are much less likely to go into debt for higher ed. Praise God. How many millennials are just hamstrung with these debts? Excuse me, if anybody has a liberal arts degree, I apologize, because it does have value. However, in a tough economy, can you feed your family? Can you be self-sustaining? And that's one of the great strengths of this generation is, do they believe in more education? Well, maybe not in a formal degree, but that's the way the world is going anyway. Yes, Ty.
So I don't know if you're okay if I interject some questions here.
Oh, please. Yes, that's why I walked away from the PowerPoint. Yes, sir, please.
So I would bet several dollars that I might be the only Generation Z person on this call this morning. So it's definitely very interesting and relevant. But I'm actually on the older end of that spectrum. So I was born in 1998.
Oh, yeah.
So I realize that I'm probably more of an exception than, where the generation's really starting to develop, because I still remember cassette tapes and then CDs and dial-up internet. And I personally never had a smartphone until, probably 2014. So I realize I'm the exception in a lot of this, but kind of going back to your comments about higher education. So when I was 10 years old, my dad had a great job, Fortune 500 company working in sales. 2009, that company got bought out, laid the entire sales staff off. And thank God, 6 months later, he was able to land another job at another Fortune 500 company. 18 months later, that company gets bought out, lays the whole staff off. So by that time, I was probably 12 years old. And learned that there was a big lie that had been spread, that if you go to college and get a job at a good company, you will never have to worry about a paycheck. And I learned very, very quickly within 24 months that is not true.
That's not. Thank you for sharing that, because you have lived this, and you actually are compelling because you lived the transition, right? You lived that transition. Now you're in healthcare. You're in the healthcare world.
Yep. Yeah. So I did go to college for the first couple of years on scholarships, and I'm a big learner, so I loved being there. But what you said about the cost of it, once the scholarship started running out and the money came out of my pocket, I left, because I have learned the two things that I do in my day-to-day job, marketing and sales. Okay. I have never taken a formal class in any of those subjects. I have learned everything that I know through YouTube or mentors that I've never met in person.
Exactly. And yet, what a wonderful thing, Ty, because you went into adulthood without this debt, oppressive debt. And I did not understand school loans until I actually, about 5 years ago, chaired a dissertation for a young woman out of Alaska who was doing her study on females and graduate school debt. And to me, just turned the debt into a mortgage model rather than a credit card model. I had no idea. And people would say, well, I owe more now than I did 20 years ago. And I'm thinking, what? You've been paying 20 years. It's because school loans are modeled like credit cards. Rather than a mortgage, I've got a 15-year fix. I'm going to pay it off and knock it down. And it really is a nasty lie. It's a nasty lie. And families have gone bankrupt. They take out these second mortgages on their homes for children to get a degree that's not marketable. And Ty, what you were sharing is that knowledge is extremely important to be able to flex and be able to pivot. But when you can go on the internet, when you can go to YouTube, or community colleges are the biggest bang for the buck. And I'll tell you, one of the big things about community colleges, you guys probably know this, they don't have tenured faculty usually that control the curriculum. So when in the business world, when the economy is shifting, the community college can very quickly shift their curriculum. And it's not always an AA, it might just be a certification program. Like HVAC, they're going to develop, a company comes in, they're going to build the HVAC lab there in the community college. And having that kind of flexibility is so important. But even in the home care industry, they just want somebody who's going to show up for work. Yes, have a basic, you may have taken some basic LPN classes or whatever, but once somebody's on the job and is shown to be dependable, consistent, have a great personality working with people, usually the business is going to underwrite at least a percentage. You want to keep good people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
As leaders, you need to keep good people. And the data here, over 25% of Gen Z say you should only stay at a job a year. And that's a little scary because they're happy to try anything. They don't own homes. They don't even have car payments. So they're going to be able to pack a duffel bag or, and just head out any place. But I think higher ed is in trouble, but I also think they need to be in trouble because higher ed often has been willing to put people into the kind of economic bondage that they just cannot grow out of. But it's exciting, Ty, for you. Can you share with us emotionally what it's like to have those kind of resources yourself? Like to just know if something new comes up, I need to know I can do it, because there's a resiliency in your voice. Would you mind just sharing with us from the emotional perspective?
Yeah, it's very empowering. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that this generation doesn't need people to teach them the information. They need people to help them interpret how to use the information. And the big thing that, as you said, higher education is in trouble because up until and even now, the model is these are the things you need to know, and trust us, you'll need to know them at some point and use them. And as most people can probably attest, there were a good portion of things that they've never used. Whereas the better way to retain information is I have this problem and I need to figure out how to solve it. And now the barrier is removed that if, at 9 a.m. I have some sort of marketing issue that I'm not getting enough leads or, I'm not converting enough sales. Okay, by the afternoon, I can have watched several different strategies and have something implemented by the end of the day. And like you said, those community colleges, the big advantage is that the people that are teaching those classes, chances are either currently in that industry or are very recently in that industry versus being experts in the theory of the industry. Like a lot of the higher education model.
Don't have application because the application is what is so fluid right now. And when you don't have the problem solving skills and the ability to analyze and reflect, that's why so many people are dependent on others, because they can't problem solve. They have never been given that capacity, but it's very empowering for individuals to have that. But what it also means, Ty, is that you're harder to control, because if you have this freedom and can problem solve, right? But that's part of the West, isn't it? That's part of the West. I mean, people came here who were resilient. My grandmother lived they lived in a cave while they were building, her parents were building the sod, the sod cabin. She lived way into their 90s. My children knew them well. And, but that resiliency is something that unfortunately, some millennial parents are not providing for their children. And it's as if millennial parents, as a group, we have terms like helicopter parents, and now we have iPhone parents, because do you know, I've met people, and I was doing a faculty training, not here, I promise, and this lady she was on her phone. This was in Vermont last year. And, the administrator said, we're putting away our phones. And I finally, and he looks at her and she said, well, her daughter was out at ASU, Arizona State. And she said, well, my daughter's finishing class and I need to find out how her class went. And I need to make sure she makes it to her next class on time. Slap me in the face. And it's like, but you know what? We can laugh at that, but isn't that tragic? Isn't that tragic that that child doesn't have the freedom to get to class? I'm not talking about late at night in a dangerous place. So we have a generation of parents who don't want to quite let go of their students. And, with the Buckley Amendment, professors aren't allowed to tell the parents what's going on. But this generation, the 18, 19-year-olds, they sign the waiver left and right. So mommy can come in and fuss at a chemistry professor about question 3 that her daughter answered B, and that was the answer. And you're saying the answer is all of the above. I mean, it's just dysfunctional. Yes, Shane.
So I know that we've got a number of educators on from Great Falls College, which is kind of a college, and it's great to have them here. And they have done a fantastic job pivoting, moving, trying to create a curriculum that's very advantageous for this Gen Z as well. They even came out with a 8-week advantage course, a very condensed curriculum for particular studies. What can you share with them? How can they continue to attract Gen Z to advance their learning at a high school and to get them on campus, experience campus? But what are some maybe talking points you could share with them that they can take home and say, you know what, this might be a great idea that we can start to, market to Gen Z to get them to come on and take a few classes from us?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, shout out to my brothers and sisters in higher education. And I'm just thrilled to hear, because the very first thing I would have recommended you're already doing, and that is we've got to condense our curriculum, and that the 8-week courses are ideal. And we talk about attention span, but life is so fluid right now. And I've been teaching 8-week grad classes now for almost a decade, but even with adult learners, many of whom are now your age, Ty, or a little bit older, I would say look for more and more condensing your curriculum. In fact, I would encourage you with those first couple years, if there's any way to flip the whole curriculum into shortened classes, please do that. Please do that. That's going to make a real difference. I'm a huge believer in dual credit in high school, and I don't know what you're able to do. I know it's a little bit difficult for universities and high schools. The issue is who gets the money, but wherever you can, I would urge you to continue partnering with the community. Where can you partner as far as the actual content of the curriculum? But then the whole idea of apprenticeship and mentoring, it's the mentoring that these kids love. And for all of their tied to technology, they love stories. And that's one thing that mentors are able to do. So any place in the curriculum, partnering, getting them into the workplace. A couple weeks ago, I had to have a plumber in, and there was a young kid with him. He did look about 18. And I looked at him, I said, so are you 18? And he said, well, yeah. I said, well, in a few weeks, I'm speaking to a chamber of commerce. I said, share with me about what you're doing. And he was doing all of his education through apprenticeship. But in higher education, we have to determine what classes and what content is best taught in the classroom, what content can be taught online, but then where can we as educators partner with people in the field. How do we get our students into the field? And then how do we get them coming back in and sharing that? But I really believe one of the biggest things is shortening those classes. You know, if you shorten classes, in essence, you have 6 small semesters. And what is so wonderful about that is someone can take a term off. You know, you would have 2 in your typical fall, 2 in your typical spring, 2 in your typical summer. But it gives great flexibility. Look at even in agriculture here, there's certain times when you're planting that beautiful hard red winter wheat, you know, that's so important. There are times of harvesting. There are times when people would have specific responsibilities outside of a classroom. Well, you can take an 8-week block off, but you can still be really knocking out your hours towards a degree. I also think that more and more colleges, and maybe you're already doing that at Great Falls, is giving credit for experiential learning. Meaning a course has certain content and certain objectives, but individuals in their workplace might have already met all of those objectives. The military does this better than anybody, and the Air Force is brilliant at this. In fact, the military is looking at combining all the branches into offering degrees, but where they will look at different things that you've done in the military, and you'll be able to cover content in this class and cover content in this class. So even though it may mean fewer full-time professors, I really believe that if we want to survive as higher educators, we have to be willing to say, if an individual already knows this stuff, why are we going to make them pay money for it and sit in a class listening to us? You know, that's a waste of time. Also, spend time with your students. But spending time with your students may be texting them, having a class Instagram. If you're doing something in a class, let them post pictures, let them post comments. Now, look, that makes me nervous. This is a woman who isn't on Facebook. I call it the F-bomb. I've never touched Facebook. It's the F-bomb. I've seen it destroy a lot of leaders' lives. That's why, in education, I've seen it destroy lives. But if technology, I think a simple thing with working with a generation, and I do this even with my grad students, how do you want me to communicate with you? And I now have a lot of grad students, they're texting me questions, they're not a complete sentence. People say, oh, they're not learning to write. Wait a minute. It's, you know, they're overseas or they're on a ship someplace, they need a quick answer. So as educators, we need to find out from our learners, this applies in the workplace also, how do your employees want you to communicate with them? And you need to find that out. And remember, because they are available to each other 24/7, they expect that from us. And so professors who used to say, well, I'll wait 24 hours to answer an email, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous for this generation. And I think that educators need to be willing to be fluid and find out how can I best meet your needs? How do I best support you so that you can be successful? This is a generation that will have a voice. And remember, because of technology, they have options, right? They can go to school anywhere in the world. We want them to stay here and get their roots down into this community. I don't know if any of that's helpful. Does anybody want to speak up? Or I'd love to hear some of the things you guys are already doing.
Yeah, Ellen, I know Ty's got a question as well too, and we're about 9:45, 15 minutes, but we can go longer. Definitely, if you guys got time and want to stay on, and I know Ellen's available for more questions. But Ty, why don't you go ahead and ask your question or share?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo your sentiment about speed of learning the content. In my experience in the traditional 16-week semester that I experienced, I would always start out really excited, you know, wanting to learn the information and feeling like it started to happen too slow. And I think to be effective educators in this current environment, you have to look at the behaviors outside of what's happening in the classroom. And Netflix, I think, is a great example. They will release a new series on Friday that has 10 one-hour episodes, and by Saturday night, they will have watched every single one. So it's not necessarily that their attention span is short and they can't pay attention. It's that when it takes too long, they're not going to tune in. And that's what you see it on cable television shows.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's watching them, because why would I tune in every week when I can watch everything all at once and knows what happens in the story and move on with my life? And that's the same thing happening in the classroom. Is we're going to teach you accounting over 16 weeks. Why? You could teach me this weekend accounting and then put me with somebody that can help me filter that information. And in 3 weeks, I could probably be doing some basic level bookkeeping.
See, that's exactly right. And that's where the application becomes so exciting, right, Ty? That if you can learn enough content, you're immediately putting it into practice. And that's where the value of a professor or a mentor or a business leader, you know, somebody back and forth. There's somebody here from Foothills.
Yeah, we have Carrie Koteski on. And the other thing too that I've heard as well with the Gen Z is that as managers and supervisors and professors and teachers is that these folks these days, they want immediate feedback. They grew up on Facebook, they make a post, they get their likes. And so that's why as managers, we need to say, hey, thanks for what you did and appreciate what you did today. They want that feedback constantly. And we come from a generation, I do, where you get your annual review. And so
Exactly.
very important that we're constantly giving feedback. Here's how you're doing. I'm your coach. I'm your mentor. I'm here to help you succeed and thrive in this company. And giving that feedback is what they really need these days. So,
And
Carrie,
that's
I'll
where
turn it
even
over to
just
you.
using Instagram or whatever, or texting, you know, great day today. Man, our numbers were up, just that instant feedback. An annual review means nothing to them. I mean, it would if, but you know what I mean? They're not going to be there. If you don't encourage them, they're not going to be employed. That they will have found something else usually by the end of that year. Okay,
Carrie, let's turn it to you and have you share or ask a question.
Hi, Carrie. That's a beautiful picture behind you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed you yesterday at the school. I was home with kids, but I do our recruitment and marketing for Foothills.
Well, we had a
And
great
one of
day.
the-
Thank you. Thank you.
I heard it was fantastic. One of the things that we've heard from talking to different marketing groups is even at the 8 through 12, even 6 through 12, students are now starting to make the enrollment decisions. So it's no longer just the colleges that are facing that. So what are some tips and suggestions you have from, you know, the private school standpoint or even to the college standpoint of best ways to reach? Like I know you talked about that they want critical thinking, they want that feedback. What are some ways that you would suggest that we can better market to those? It just blows my mind that 13-year-old kids are deciding where they want to go to school. But since that's
Well,
the
it blows
reality.
my mind, but I'll tell you this, I hear this all over. I don't hear it in Asia. Oh, no, ma'am. I do not hear it at the international schools, but you hear it here everywhere in private education. And what it often comes down to, first of all, girls are much more inclined to push to leave. And we have, you know, we do have issues related to that. But oftentimes, if one student leaves, they get their friends all to leave. And I think I would say, and David's here, I would say to the educational leaders, one of the most important marketing things, we all know this, is retention. I mean, retention is your big, whether you've hired somebody, retention is your biggest marketing. You want to retain, and how important that is, how important it is for faculty members to be aware if you sense any tension amongst the young people, to step in as quickly as possible and to help resolve that. You can't just let that fester. And I would say, particularly in a small school, you get one middle school girl upset, and if she's the queen bee, you know, you can have a disaster, and you can have, you know, 10 families pull out over something that didn't have to get to be that way. Now, because they tell stories and they're connected, a lot of the marketing is not going to be advertisements in an annual journal, you know, educational, the local paper once a year is a big educational thing. It's word of mouth. And in the smaller schools, it's often word of mouth. And having parents, having a parent invite a non-school family to coffee, you know, inviting the community, being relational. One thing I see more and more with teenagers and middle school through high school, letting kids come in and shadow for a day. Now, I know that can be a little stressful is that okay, David? I say this, and you're already doing that. And so even somebody that's even partially interested, when they come into a school like Foothills Community, and they see it really is a community, it really is a family, they're going to be loved and nurtured. The teachers, and I'm not saying other teachers aren't warm, but when you have the kind of community that's in the name, those teenagers and kids are going to be drawn to that in a way that they never would be. You know, when my granddaughter in 5th grade shadowed and it was, "Grandmommy, I've got to tell you this," and you know, she was just going on and on. So retention, and then building community, having your families invite people in, inviting families in for lunch. I mean, just anything you can do to get boots on the ground. And that's what brick and mortar stores, you know, the first thing you got to do is get them to even get in their car and come to the store before they're going to purchase anything. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
That is, thank you.
And I've got another follow-up question, I guess, as well, too, and it kind of ties in with Carrie's a little bit. And again, I think as business owners, I know Rob Rezak's here from D.A. Davison. He's their IT person. Lori Sarik's here with Family Connections, a nonprofit. Doris is here with Center for Mental Health. Chelsea with NeighborWorks as well. So I guess my question is you've kind of said some things and how giving and generous the Gen Z generation is. And so I think we are seeing a lot of these younger generations moving into healthcare, nonprofits, because they want to make a difference. But my question is how do educators, and it'll dovetail with Carrie's, is how can they reach into the high schools to make an impact, to let them know that we offer that? Because again, our college has done a phenomenal job crafting customized programs, whether it's for an employer or for students who are looking to upgrade, I guess, their education. What can we do to reach into those high schools to start making an impact in those kids saying, this might be something I want to pursue?
Well, I would hope that you have career days and where you also have college days where colleges come in and present, and how important that is. But it's not just at those kind of events, it's when you can form partnerships with schools. And so somebody is actually going in during class time. I would also say a lot of that is getting these kids even to shadow at the college, right? Where you're getting those kids in, or allowing them to come in to the nursing home to visit, or to the nonprofit, and looking at ways to have volunteer. This is a generation that will give their time, and just looking for very specific ways. If the schools have not already invited you, I would encourage you, especially in the bigger picture, to contact those administrators with a specific idea. And because you know, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a business or a JUCO, whatever it is that you want to present, when you contact an administrator who are just putting out fires a lot of the day, right, David? And so they may philosophically buy into this, but contact people with a very specific plan. Could we come in and do this? Or we have this event in May. Would 10 of your high school students be able to come and volunteer? We will come in and train them, and put just together a little blurb. This is your goal and objective, and these are the steps that you would need to take. It is so much easier for an academic person, an educator, an administrator to look at something like that and say yes or no. Because if it's already formulated, they can pass it off. This is a great idea. And then it's coming to you as director of development, right? I mean, the administrator then can sign off, hand it to the person that's going to implement that. So that would be my recommendation if you want to try some things. But then when you do it, you've got to use social media. Anytime you're doing anything, you've got to use social media. Now, you have to be careful with pictures of minors as far as permission. I mean, there are some things that you would have to be careful, but you want to get word out into the community and follow up on how successful it was, and then partner with the school. Always do, you know, one thing the military does really well, when they come back from something and they stand down and they do a quick analysis. Well, even if it's just spending an afternoon with a certain nonprofit, you know, capture what worked well And then also, was there anything that didn't work well? What's one little change we would make? And you make a note of that. And so the next year or the next month when you revisit that, so it's Kaizen, it's Deming's work, Kaizen. And we know Deming, we wouldn't listen to him here. So he goes to Japan and rebuilds the economy there. But that whole idea of Kaizen, just small incremental improvements, always looking for ways to make little changes.
You bet. I see we got Dr. Leanne Frost on as well, and I know Leanne very well. So she comes from my neighborhood on the Fairfield bench. So Leanne, I think you've got something to share, questions?
I do, and I'm sorry, I have to step off at 10 o'clock for another meeting, but I'm the Executive Director of Instruction at Great Falls College. And Dr. Black, I just appreciate you sharing your thoughts and experience. I would say that we echo what you have been talking about. We did create the 8-week advantage so that we could offer the credentials in a more condensed format and get students through their prerequisites quicker so they can get out to the workforce quicker.
Leanne,
also,
has your retention gone up?
It has.
Exactly.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And then working, of course, with our dual credit partners, offering more dual credit pathways, working with our business partners for more internships, telling our stories now in marketing or telling student stories in marketing. So I just want to echo everything that you've said, and thank you for sharing your experience as well.
Well, thank you. And it's just wonderful to hear this success, because everybody who's here today, we are committed to the success and of each generation, but it's also our success. And what I mean by that, most everybody here, you do what you do because you really believe it's a calling, and you're the loving, kind people of the world. And we don't want to invest our days in something that's not going to be as successful, as possible. Retention is huge. Retention is huge, and moving, and retention, it's interesting if you look at the data on particularly minorities, Latina, African American kids that go to college, and it's like colleges want to say, oh, our freshman class, well, 12% is this or that. Well, honey, look at the sophomore class demographics. And the tragedy is for many is, what is happening? Yes, it's one thing to be accepted, but then what structures are we putting around? We know a group that's at great risk starting college is first generation college students. It doesn't matter what color you are. If you come from a family where there's not that history, what are the structures and support that we're putting around that? So that is so exciting. Next time I'm back, may I come and visit your school?
We would love to have you come visit our school.
I would really be honored.
And here in our area, the Native American student population is our highest at risk by ethnicity. So we do have a Native American Enrichment Center. We also have a Veteran Center. So we've done all these things to help those students feel more comfortable and have that sense of belonging that students want to have as well. And we have a lot of first generation students. So we're very good at helping them learn the culture of college along with the course content. So absolutely, Shane can put you in touch with me. We would love to have you come visit.
Thank you. And I just want to speak to that. And I've done a lot of work in Alaska in the Copper River area, large Athabascan population. In fact, one of my boys up there, one of my Athabascan, he calls me his white mama. But one of the things that he said, was shutting down Anwar and with no tourism. And he said, we're just drowning economically up here. And that oil money is what has been able to support Native American communities and help build stronger schools. And so that economic impact, and it's happening here. It's going to happen in Alberta, which has a large Indigenous First Nations community, as they call it in Canada. And so this economic downturn is really going to, it's going to hit the neediest communities by far the hardest.
Ellen, I'm gonna, it's 10 o'clock, and again, we're welcome, continue to stay on. If you can't stay on and would like to stay on and answer some questions, but I'm maybe gonna put Rob Rizak on the spot, and I'm just gonna kind of give him the heads up now. Hopefully he's there and he's listening, but we've got Kim Martin on, who kind of made a comment in the chat box, as well as having, young kids at home, and sometimes the heartbreak of seeing folks with debt. They got 50, 80 grand in debt, and they're making 30 grand a year these days. But Rob, what are you seeing? You're an IT tech, you're an IT guy. And So I'm sure you've got, and you always got great insight and great input, but obviously you're working with a lot of Gen Z that are coming out of school and they want to get into IT because they grew up with it. What are you seeing, and maybe what are you doing there at D.A. Davison
Rob.
to communicate with them, motivate them, and attract them?
Well, I've been hiring since 2004. Oversaw a team of about 40 people in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and here I oversee about 40 people. We have, old senior professionals in IT that have been here for 30 years, and we have interns and young professionals straight out of college. We've even dabbled with some high school internships just for goodwill and to give some high school students that are in dual enrollment some opportunities. I joined the meeting because you do have to take the time to understand different generations and views and needs, not only from a retention and recruitment perspective, but from a relationship building perspective. I empathize with this generation. I do not bash on them like you so frequently see.
Yeah.
They are some of the smartest, most educated,
Yes.
adaptive people you'll encounter in terms of learning. They have been accustomed to information streamed at them on demand. Their usage of YouTube is off the charts. They can watch videos on anything that is out there. They're very adaptive. They're very intelligent. They need people development skills.
Yes. Yes.
We have them work together in team collaborative manners to learn how to work together, because they are sometimes quick to point fingers at each other and work in that little silo. I guess I don't have too much to say other than it's just important to take the time to understand their social and political and life world views, as you should do with any employee. And I also am a little disgusted at comp for sustainable comp. I have a social liberal side to me in terms of a sustainable lifestyle.
Yes.
And I've told my firm I will not hire people if we cannot pay them a fair wage. We will go without. We will not fill this position if we are going to pay them $12, $13, $14 an hour. We will find ways to hire and develop higher performing people and pay them more. And I'd rather pay more to fewer people than less to more people.
Yeah.
So you have now. The difference is we're hiring fairly trained people.
Okay.
In IT, it is a established career path. There are certifications. We're specifically targeting computer science degrees, not the other computer degrees, but in the development area of what I manage. We're hiring computer science graduates from Montana State University. That's the university that we partner with, and we've hired 3. Now these people are coming out of college with an earning potential of $50,000 to $60,000. So they have a career and an education that is hard. Through MSU, they have 5 calculus courses. They have 6, 7 hands-on development courses. I mean, yes, they're green, but they don't get through this degree without having a high aptitude and inclination for technology. So it is a little bit different for us in terms of, we're not hiring. Expectations are high too, though. They're pretty educated on what other employers are paying. They can negotiate. They can
negotiate, and because they have access to what other employers are paying, that they are coming into the workplace with that knowledge. And I just want to piggyback, Rob, off of what you were saying on really helping them with interpersonal skills, because most people who lose their job, they're losing their job because of the ability to work with others or showing up on time or whatever those things are. And how do we support that is just is just invaluable. Could you just take a minute to share, what did you find with your the kids that came in and did projects? Are any of them then going to university to pursue a tech
Well,
degree?
I didn't have this growing up. My generation X, I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I didn't really know what I was going to do until I was 21, 22.
Okay.
Some of these kids that are getting into, or young professionals that are getting into dual enrollment through
Mhm.
the high school and through, Great Falls College and through other, secondary education type organizations have a plan.
Right.
They are almost some of them are ridden with anxiety over grades and performance.
Yes.
The competition is so fierce for them,
Mhm.
and they know what they want to do, which I think is a bane and a fortune at the same time. To have a plan is kind of necessary in today's age if you're going to be a certain professional, computer science or
It is, and I think
architect or.
it really relates to school debt, because the kids go in, they switch their major. It takes them another year or two, and they're that much further, they're that much further in debt, which makes it that much harder to be self-sustaining. So,
Yep.
but it sounds
I
like
have
you have a wonderful partnership with the university and that they've been flexible in their curriculum, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, I have other managers here that report to me or are in the department, and they have young college.
Great.
They have kids that are in the early college years, and several of them have gone into computer degrees because their dad or mom was in a computer degree. And I hear about all of their stress and the mental breakdowns that some of them have at college, trying to
Yes.
hit these high score grades and compete with everyone else, and
Yeah.
the stress that they put on themselves and things like
That's true. A
that.
lot of anxiety. And here in Great Falls, and you have the mental health issues of suicide, and if everybody got a little more vitamin D, I know that's not the only thing, but it's hard. It's hard, and the winters are hard, and but the mental health of this generation, and I think part of that does relate to technology when you're just being bombarded and you're watching history unfold in real time, and some of it's violent and some of it's scary, and it's disconcerting, and helping them process even some of the things that are going on socially. It's a real challenge, all the way around, and addressing that anxiety. Huge.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why my daughter brought my grandkids, got them out of California to go to school. The anxiety and the depression beginning to set in. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Lori, I know you're on, and Tammy and Marlena. John, any other questions?
I have to excuse myself. I have a 10 o'clock that I'm 10 minutes late on. But thank you, Dr. Black, for talking with us. And I always like hearing different perspectives. When you hit certain levels of professional development, in a large company like D.A. Davidson or others I've worked for, we get set. I've been to the Security Industry Institute at Wharton for 3 years. They sent me for a week, attending micro expression courses and generation courses, and hearing some of the best speakers. And it's really valuable just to get different insights into the way the world works and what people are dealing with. So I like these types of things, and I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
But excuse me. Thank you.
Any other questions? And Tammy, I know you run the, yeah, I'll just let you say what all you do. So Yes, and you're on mute right now as well.
I
So.
am. So I thank Shane and thank you, Dr. Black. You know what you said, I'm also fascinated by the different generations and, you know, how to relate to them. And that's really what it is about, relationships. You have to have the relationships not only with the different generations, but with the businesses in order to partner with the university.
Mhm.
All of that. And I find, you know, the technology, and I just have to ask you, have you watched the documentary Social Dilemma?
I have not yet. I need to.
Please
I
do.
need- I will. I
Yeah.
give you my word.
Please do, because it is so enlightening. And while I completely agree with you in that, you know, the information that is at the fingertips of this generation is just unbelievable. I do think that, and I think Rob spoke to it too. Yes, like teaching them the social conventions,
Mhm.
but also with the understanding of how they relate, you know, whatever their, I don't, you know, their love language. That's not it, but their work language, you know, but work.
Harry Smalley would be proud of you though for knowing the love languages. Yes, he would.
So, you know, but having all of that information, and I firmly believe that technology in the hands of young minds, especially in that middle school, I again watch Social Dilemma because I think it plays into mental health and not in a good way.
Yes, and the research is coming out more and more related to that. And it is because they don't have the maturity to process some of that. And
Yeah.
that is very, very true. One of the things that, you know, when we talk about communication, we need to adapt to them. I think sometimes, as quote the older people, we keep thinking, oh, they need to adapt to us. They're coming to us for a job. They're coming to me for a class. But the truth is we need to understand them and speak their language, because, you know, love languages have saved, that book has saved a lot of marriages. But in many ways, these kids are speaking a foreign language. And so even if we have the same intent of everybody being successful and building capacity, if you're speaking a foreign language, you're just passing each other.
Oh, without a doubt. And you know, getting them aware of sometimes, and this is, so I run our Career and College Readiness Center. So we work with adults, 16 to 83. And we help them get either their high school equivalency. We're getting them ready for college. We're getting them ready for the workforce. That's what we do. But I also oversee at the college the lifelong learning program, which is your non-credit. We do customized training for businesses. You know, we do the professional series. We're just starting a CNA program, which I'm excited. It's a huge need for the community. But it's those conventions getting, sometimes no matter what the age, because we deal with individuals that have a lot of barriers, whether they're mental health barriers, where they're physical barriers, learning barriers, whatever those might be, teaching them and how to be aware of what environment are they in? How do you operate within? How do you problem solve and work together with all ages, with, you know, that's fascinating. I'm passionate about what we do.
It is fascinating. And even an undergrad, even a freshman level class, professors now will have 3 generations in that one class.
Yes, we do. That is who we serve. And so having the blend of all of that is just important. I appreciate your knowledge and everything you shared today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's fun to be here.
And I do hope you come to the college the next time you're in town.
I would love that. That's non-negotiable. Yes, ma'am.
Does anyone have any other questions at all? Looks like we're down to a few. So, well, Dr. Black, again, thank you so much. And I did great comments in the chat box, just folks just thanking you for sharing your insight and your advice, and how we can reach out to Gen Z and communicate with them and motivate them as well too. So everyone, I want to let you also know, and I forgot to at the beginning, but we did record this. So hopefully that's okay. We will be reaching out to everybody that attended, but our hope is to, again, have this on our website and so others can watch it as well too. So But thank you all. Definitely Dr. Black is invited back, and hopefully with her fishing passion, we'll get her here in June or July, and we'll get her again to visit some of the schools and some of your organizations.
That would be great. Thank you, Shane. And thank you for the chamber for what you're doing in your community. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. So, hey, everybody, have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. And we'll be back in here on Monday as well. And but thanks for joining us this morning.
Signing us out. Over and out.
That was fun.
It was fun.
2 years ago, MSU here in town, the junior college, that's tied with Montana State University, they changed their semester classes. They go to 8-week sessions.
That's wonderful.
And so you could still take your 16 hours
Exactly.
in a semester, but you do 8 in the first 8 weeks and 8. in
Right.
the
And so you
second
might
8
have 2
weeks.
and exactly.
Right.
It
And
makes so much
And
sense.
it's really helped too with the dual credit. It's opened up the doors for my kids to go do
Oh.
dual credit easier and quicker. And it
That's
doesn't
wonderful.
screw up the way way we do our grade group, because we're not aligned exactly
Completely.
on
Yeah.
the college calendar.
Yeah.
And so it's really made it really nice. And that's why I've had one, and now it looks like I'll have a second one this year that'll have their associates before they get their
That's
high
incredible.
school diploma.
I mean,
And
that's
so
incredible.
It's really, really, really fun.
Great people.
So yeah, good people here.
Good people, like
here.
really good people and committed, and yeah, just
This
what a
community,
treat.
the one thing, I don't know if I shared this with you, but the one thing that I picked up on after, a few months here is whether you're public, private,